and audacity in 3, 2, 1.
Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Lynn, and I'm here with my co-host, Marissa Roy. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking all about advanced training techniques.
Yeah, we thought, we haven't nerded out like this in a while or talked about training, period, in a pretty long time. And I think it comes from a good place, right? Like we don't want to sit here and overwhelm you with all this stuff. But I figure if it's one particular episode and we're very clear on who it's for and who it's not for, then I think it could go over really well and our more advanced trainees would really appreciate it. So I'm excited to get into this stuff. I haven't talked about training. I haven't written that many training programs in the past 2 years. So yeah, this will be fun.
Yeah, I feel like your clients are probably like, oh, thank God Marissa's not writing my training programs.
Yeah. There was a day and a time where that was a dreaded thing to have me do. But I feel like it's timely though, because I just started getting back into a good groove with my own training where I'm using some of this stuff now and it's refreshing. Our last coaches meeting, we talked about some of this stuff. So it's kind of just timely, I think, to get back into the weeds, the science a little bit.
Yeah. No, I think it'll be a lot of fun. And I was going to say that too with you. I feel like, especially since training has taken more, I don't want to say a priority for you,
It
but
has.
definitely, yeah, with signing up with a coach, and especially talking a lot on your stories and stuff about just how you're making it a priority now. And I think that is really fun. And I'm excited to talk through all these things.
Yeah, I think that's an important prerequisite. So most of our episodes, we talk about people that talk to people, I guess, that are working on really integrating this into your life in a slow, sustainable way. This episode is not for that person who's I'm getting started on my weight loss journey and I don't know what to do. Don't listen to this. Go listen to 150 other episodes that are more just, and not because you're not capable. It's just it's so unnecessary at that point in the journey. And it's details that will overwhelm and just be kind of not applicable at that point, because what do we need to do at that phase in the journey is you need to get in the gym and learn strength training, the basics. And then once you're doing that and you develop a love for it and the strength and the wow factor with the gym and feeling strong and empowered, it's okay, well then and we can have fun with it. You're going 3-4 days a week or something, maybe even 5, and you're just loving it and you want to learn more and do more and push your body. This is the episode for you.
Yeah. And so I, like you were saying, I think it's really important. It's okay, for those beginners, yeah, just turn it off now. But this is for someone who maybe is trying to overcome a plateau. You have been, just kind of stalled with your weight training. You might have just kind of hit a plateau. You don't really feel like you're really doing much of anything. Maybe you're not seeing an increase in strength or, you're not gaining any muscle. So it including an advanced technique into your training program could introduce a new stimulus that your body isn't necessarily really used to. And so that kind of just is going to promote further adaptation and growth. So especially if you're someone who's been following the same workout program for a long time, not just a month, but a long time, and you've just plateaued, incorporating some of these things, you might be able to see some really, really cool results.
Yeah. Just to clarify, plateau in training, not with
Yes.
weight loss. So if you're at a weight loss plateau, go to those episodes. That's nutrition oriented and adherence oriented. Training plateau. So yeah, exactly what you said. So yeah, we got a long list to go down. So I kind of listed this out as we were kind of brain dumping what we wanted to talk about in kind of order of hierarchy of what kind of makes the biggest impact versus the least, and kind of categorizing it too. So the first one is top sets versus working sets. And this is just a really common mistake that I see with people who might be weight training regularly and maybe don't know why they haven't gotten to the next level and they're struggling to see strength gains, is they may not understand the difference between these things. And what I think most people default to is they default to top sets, meaning that let's say you have 4 sets of something and you spend those 4 sets kind of going up in weight to like see what you can handle. So like set 1 is 100 pounds, set 2 is 110, set 3 is 120, set 4 is 130. And by the 4th set, you're like, oof, that was really tough. That was great. I love it. The problem with that is that pretty much only one of those sets was really effective, was that last one. And so what we want to get into the mindset of doing, if you're not already, unless you're intentionally trying to hit a top set for something like powerlifting, is you want to always be doing working sets for the goal of building muscle, creating that adaptation of full. Let's say you have those 4 sets at that 130 mark that are all really challenging and all the reps are really tough. And you're able to hold that across the 4 sets. Like, I feel like just describing that, you can see how different that is.
Yeah. So my coach kind of explains them a little bit differently. He kind of talks about top sets or your working sets. I mean, he kind of has 2 different options, but they say that your top set should be around 80 to 90% of your 1 rep max, and reps should be between 5 and 10. And so he mentioned once you've kind of mastered the intent of that load, that's when you bump up in weight. And his working sets are defined at 75 to 85% of the maximal load you can handle at that time of the training session. And reps should be between 11 to 15. And the same rules as above apply. So he kind of talks about it in a different sense. So I think it really depends, like, who your coach is, kind of like what their training philosophy is and how they want you training. So my coach will say, okay, I want 2 working sets of this, and then I want a top set of this. So he is very, very, very specific with how you should be training.
Yeah, I think that that's really great how he has it systemized in terms of like, he has language that labels things the way that he wants his clients to understand it. I think maybe for the purpose of this, that could be really confusing. Just because like, so like, let's get into rep ranges then, because that like segues very nicely. So your coach basically calls top sets, working sets. They are assigned to a particular rep range. A top set is 5 to 10 and a working set is 11 to 15. So in the strength and conditioning literature, that's not necessarily kind of the way that it pans out. Essentially, like the rep ranges are more associated with the outcome you're looking for versus like top set, working set. It's like the language is tough because like I was just talking about this with someone the other day. We use different words to describe the same thing. And that's where people can get confused. So the meaning behind it, but I'll explain at least what like the strength and conditioning literature talks about for rep ranges. So if you Google the rep range continuum or rep maximum continuum, basically there's 4 categories: strength, power, hypertrophy, and muscular endurance. And it's like color coded. And if you look at it without knowing what the heck it's trying to tell you, you're probably like, what is happening? So the strength rep range is typically it's best in the 2 to 6 rep range. The power rep range is typically the best in the 5 or under. Hypertrophy is anywhere between 6 and 12, and muscular endurance is anything above basically 12. And so it's kind of a color-coded thing that shows that it's not black and white. It's not like as soon as you cross over into 13 reps, your muscles go into muscular endurance mode. Like, no, like you can achieve hypertrophy at any rep range, but you're going to achieve the most between 6 and 12. You can achieve muscular endurance at any rep range, but you're definitely going to achieve the most with high rep ranges. Strength and power, you think about it, you want to get as strong as possible. You need to lift the heaviest loads possible. You're not going to be able to do that many reps. So strength is built in those lower rep ranges, and power, which is strength at high speeds, is built at even lower rep ranges because that's even more taxing. So it kind of just shows that. And so I typically kind of equate rep ranges more as like, if you're looking for hypertrophy, aka muscle building and creating body recomposition, like you want to be generally in the like 6 to 20 rep range, like anything from 6 to 20, which is where I think your coach took that, like 5 to 10, 11 to 15. He's kind of going like a little bit more strength focus, a little bit more hypertrophy focus with those 2 categories. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it's just important, like when we talk about certain techniques or anything like that, to define them to have them make a little bit more sense in the context that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. So the rep range though, because what you said before we started recording was like, a lot of people are just like, well, I looked on Instagram, it said do 4 sets of 10. So you're just doing 4 sets of 10 for everything forever. But like one thing that's really powerful is you can utilize rep ranges to break plateaus. So one great example of this is, I guess I'll use like a example for an exercise I put a lot of work into. So bench press, like bench press, typically I'll plateau somewhere around like 1 rep max is like 135 ish. But if I want to increase that, I don't necessarily just do 1 rep at 135 over and over and over again, right? What I do instead is I build up tolerance to heavier loads at different rep ranges to give my body exposure to different things. So I might do really high reps, like 15s at a very low weight, just to build tolerance to like a lot of fatigue. And then another day, I might do sets of 3, sets of 4 to tolerate heavier loads and teach my body like, hey, you're going to be pushing something kind of heavy, but you need to do it more times than you would with your max. So like, let's get in the gear for that. And then when you build up enough tolerance to all of that, then typically your max load that you can move around goes up because you have more muscle and that muscle is stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. And for that example too, it's also like, okay, well, yeah, the focus is, flat bench, but then you could also do like an incline press. Like you can do a bunch of other things to support that movement. And I think it's in like, when we talk about specifically progressing with one single exercise, usually a lot of that has to do with just kind of like increasing the volume. So like, an example that I think is so funny is this, I can't remember, I think I read it in a book, or heard it on Instagram, something, but this older gentleman was at the gym and he's probably like in his 70s and he was doing one-handed push-ups. And this younger guy who's pretty strong saw that and he's like, I can do that. And he tried and just like fell on his face. And so he went up to the guy and he was like, how are you doing this? He's like, I specifically train like one arm push-ups all the time. So he's like, it's not a matter of strength. It's just, I just do it a lot. And so that was how I was able to do my first pull up. It was like, I did so many different variations of like pull downs, all the different things that we're going to talk about, like in these like advanced training techniques. But it was just so much volume to finally be able to pull my body weight up, which is something I was never able to do.
Yeah. Well, and here's the key to it. Like, simplest way to put this, if you're at a strength plateau, you either don't have enough muscle overall to actually do that movement at the load that you want, like a pull-up, that's your body weight. So you don't have enough muscle to pull your body weight up, or you might have the amount of muscle, but that muscle has not been trained to be strong enough. And so those are actually two different mechanisms. So the amount of muscle is just the like volume, the mass of the muscle on your body. Like that's like big bodybuilders, you can see they're huge, right? They have a lot of muscle. The strength of the muscle is why you might look at a power lifter and be like, you don't look like you have all this muscle. It's because they are just the amount of muscle they have, they're maximizing the strength within it. And that's the force output of that muscle. So you can train both, which is why those rep ranges make a difference. So if you're at a plateau, you have to think like, have I been doing hypertrophy, muscle building, and expansion type training my whole life? Maybe that's why I can't get past this threshold of this weight. Maybe I should try a strength phase to maximize the strength of those muscle fibers and then resensitize them to muscle growth and growing them with higher loads because now I'm stronger. So that's a really good way to look at it. Is it's usually one or the other, and then you can involve skill with things like push-ups, pull-ups, calisthenics, power movements like Olympic lifting, but generally it's one of those two things if you're just stuck at a plateau with a weight.
Yeah.
I guess that kind of like in a way explains the auto-regulated double progression model. So essentially this is just a way to track progress with lifting that I recommend you do if you do not do this. And essentially it's just, you have a rep range. Let's say it's Christina's 11 to 15, and you use a weight until you are able to max out that rep range of like 4 sets of all 15s instead of 4 sets of 11s. Like that shows progress, right? Because you just did 3 more reps per set. That's a lot of a difference. Once you max that out, then you move on to the next weight, and you start at the bottom and you go up from there. And so that's training, within your rep range, the hypertrophy. It's also training the strength at newer loads each time. So that's something you can repeat indefinitely and usually be able to make pretty good progress with.
Yeah, yeah, it's super fun.
Yeah.
And like something before, and like when I just started off with training, I was like, I don't know, just like I felt like I needed to change up my workouts like pretty frequently. And now like really, really following this method, it's so much, even to get like one additional rep, you're like,
Yeah.
heck yeah. Like I'm strong as fuck.
That's what I was going to say too. It's like at a certain point, you do this for long enough, you're like, your progression is really fucking slow. It's just
Oh my
like,
God, it's awful.
I went from 4 sets of 10 at 95 pounds to like 3 sets of 10 and 1 set of 11. Woohoo! Like it doesn't sound exciting, but it is, because if you're consistently like tracking it, looking at it and being like, I'm going to beat this, like it's really cool to see when that happens. So if you're newer, it's going to take a while for you to get to that place. But like, that's where, when I really take it seriously, that's where I'm at. Like I'm constantly just like, well, 1 more rep, 5 more pounds. But that's where it's like, you really find your limits too.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot of fun. And one of the things we were talking about in office hours with our clients the other day was being comfortable enough in the gym to ask for a spot. And I was saying, I was like, man, at this point, I was like, I do not care. I was like, if my coach like has me wanting to increase like my rep range or something and I need a spot, I was like, I'm gonna ask. I don't care. So I think that's actually something that we'll talk about a little bit later as far as different types of training, especially training with a spotter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that just kind of lends itself to, if you're training and you need somebody to kind of make sure you don't dump the weight on your own chest or face or hurt yourself, it usually means you're training at a high rate of perceived exertion, RPE, or you don't have a lot of reps left in the tank. And so you're going to hear these terms RPE and RIR thrown around a lot in the evidence-based health and fitness space. And you're probably like, WTF does that mean? So RPE was used a lot in endurance training. So just like scale of 1 to 10, how hard are you working? That's essentially all it is. And the different numbers with endurance could indicate kind of what zone cardio you're in. But then it was translated to weight training, resistance training. And basically it's kind of the same idea. 1 to 10, how hard are you working? And like the 10 out of 10 is like, your arms are trembling, you're like barely locking the rep out, like your arms might collapse from under you, your legs might collapse from under you, like you need a spotter, like you are going to absolute failure. And then you scale back from there, 9, 8, 7, etc. Generally we want to aim for a higher RPE, like 7, 8, 9, a lot of the time. And most people don't actually get there. There's actually been a lot of research to show that most people, especially women, think they're at an RPE 8, 9. And then when you really test them to failure, they were at like a 4. Just because
Yeah.
it feels hard. And that's okay. You can't beat yourself up for it. You don't know. But like, you're just capable of so much more than you think if you really put yourself to the test.
Yeah. And I had a client of mine actually the other day. She said that she came across something on Instagram and for whatever reason, she's just like, oh wow. And it just changed her whole way of thinking about training. 'Cause she was like, I always thought it was physical. And then I heard someone say something about how like you're just so much stronger than you think you are. And she was like, and all of a sudden that just opened up the doors and I'm just training so much harder. And she's like, all from a mental switch. And I always thought it was physical. So I thought that was really, really cool. To be like, oh, the flip has switched. Like, you're going to have more fun with training now.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I feel like that is an advanced training technique in and of itself, to not be limited by what you think your body can handle. Just because something feels heavy doesn't mean that it's too heavy for you, right? It's like just really breaking that down and realizing like, what is your body capable of? Like, that is wild to find out. Like, if you ever told me back in my cardio days when like I was kind of new to this, like just kind of dabbling with the weights, if you told me that I would do a Bulgarian split squat with two 50-pound dumbbells, like for reps, yeah, I would have been like, you're insane. No, only like big jacked bodybuilders do that, right? Like,
Mhm.
and there I was, like maybe a year or 2 years ago, just doing that every other week.
Yeah. Yeah. Same thing with pull-ups. Like, oh, you're going to be able to do 10 in a row. I'd be like, what? And
Yeah.
I can only do the flexed arm hang.
Yeah, barely.
No, I was actually
Um,
good at that. I just couldn't do a pull-up, but
oh, I wasn't. I was horrible. Um, yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, there's a bunch of like little techniques we can go into, just kind of run through the list. The first kind of category, master category, is like different things we can do that increase the amount of volume. So meaning like sets, reps, like how much you're getting in the gym with less time. And the purpose of this is not only just like time efficiency. These are great strategies for time efficiency, but there's a psychological aspect of like they feel harder because you're cramming things into a shorter period of time. So if you like to feel like you're suffering, this is great for you. But they also do generate more muscular damage, metabolic waste, which can create that pump feeling. So these are great for if you are needing to generate a good pump, and just feel like you're getting a great workout in. Those muscles are just puffed up. They're, just really fatigued. And yeah, so there's multiple reasons you'd use it. It's not just like, oh, I need to be in and out of the gym in less time. And in fact, sometimes it's not the best situation for someone who doesn't love training. Like I just wouldn't give this to someone who's like, I don't really like the way it hurts my muscles. Like I'm not going to give this stuff to them. But to you psychos out there, this is for you.
yes, because this does hurt. But I feel like it could be like if you have not used any of these techniques before, I think what it also does is it kind of teaches you how to push beyond your
Mhm.
limits of what you think you're able to do, kind of like we were talking about earlier. It's like finding your threshold for pain and then pushing past that. So it's
Yeah.
like a lot of people start to, stop when, oh, my muscles are burning. And it's like, no, keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first one is a little bit more of an efficiency thing, but can also be challenging in this way, which would be straight versus supersets. So straight sets is like do a set, rest, do a set, rest, do a set, rest. Supersets are like if I were to take bicep curls, tricep push downs and do them back to back and then rest, and then do them back to back and then rest. And so like my whole arm is going to be like, what are you doing the whole time while I'm in that superset? And so you can do this with antagonistic, so two different opposing muscle groups, or I don't know what the other word is, synergistic, similar muscle
Just
groups,
same.
same
Yeah.
muscle group. Yeah, like you could just do bicep, bicep, and that'll suck. Like that's just double the work in on the same muscle. Typically I like to go with the antagonistic for efficiency's sake, but if there's a purpose to do them together back to back, you can do that too. But that's a great way to save time, get bang for your buck, and also just get like blood flow in the area that you want. Like if I wanted my legs to just blow up, I could do leg extensions and leg curls back to back, and I'd just be wobbling, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the examples that I was thinking of, and I've seen people do this at the gym, and I'm like, oh man, that sucks. Is like, you were talking about bench press. So it's like, doing bench press and then immediately hopping off and doing like push-ups on the floor. Like that sounds awful, especially if
Yeah.
you're training really hard.
Yeah. And the thing about that, like same group, muscle group supersets, I think a lot of times people do them, but don't realize it's actually very unproductive. Like leg press and then squat jumps. Like, don't do that. Like, that's not effective. That's not advanced training. That's just trying to burn a lot of calories. A lot of this stuff has a very intense purpose behind it, intentional purpose behind it. Um, versus just feeling like you're working hard. That's a part of it, but there's specific benefits to each. So like, for example, next one, German volume training. This is 10 sets of 10 with 60 seconds of rest in between on one exercise. And it absolutely sucks. But the purpose is that you can get a lot of volume in on like a compound movement. Like I would do this like back in the day with squats or leg press. And you could basically get a whole workout in like however long that takes, which is not long. But it kills, and it really challenges you to find a weight. Like the goal is to keep the weight the same the whole time, like really like hold it steady, which is really difficult because you can start with 10 reps on set 1 and be like, oh, this is too easy. And by set 7, you're like, holy F, right? So I don't know if there's much of a real purpose behind that one other than suffering, but the other ones have more of a purpose, unless you know.
Well, I was going to say, so my very, very first coach back in 2015, so he worked under Cliff Wilson, and I guess he was at that time was really, really big into German volume training. So he had me training a little bit differently, but I'm just thinking about it. I'm like, man, I mean, it sucked. Do not get me wrong. But I felt like, and I'm like, man, I should get back into that because I felt like I saw some really good results. But for him, it was like three, like I'm thinking he had me do bicep curls, like lateral raises, like a lot of the accessory movements, but he would have me do 3 seconds up, 3 seconds down, and he'd have me going for like 15 to 20 reps. And like you think, oh, okay, I'll grab like 15s or something for bicep curls. And then you're like, oh, actually, I'm very humbled and I'm gonna grab like 7s or I'm gonna grab 5s. But yeah, the amount of just like oh God, like the pumps that you would get is just stupid just because the amount of volume that you were getting in. But
I remember you took me through that at one point at that Gold's Gym. Like we did some bicep curls that way or something. Do you remember
oh my
that?
God. No, I don't, but
I remember it. But
okay.
he called that German volume training?
Yeah, actually, let me see if I can pull up that sheet that he gave me and see kind of what he said in that. I should have it. I think
Yeah, because the hallmark of German volume is like the 10 by 10. So that's interesting that he named it that.
Yeah, let me see if I can find it. This will be fun. Yeah. I save a lot of stuff, so we'll see.
Nice. I do not have stuff from that time. I'd have to pull out my old laptop, which I'm pretty sure doesn't work anymore.
Well, it's all in my Gmail. It's just my older
Oh,
one.
yeah.
But the thing is, I'm gonna have to go through all of these threads, but maybe we'll
Yeah.
have our producer cut all this out. Here's your plan for the week. We start tomorrow.
Do you want me to explain the next one while we get into that?
Sure.
While you search that? Okay. Okay, the one after that is blood flow restriction training. So we actually have a whole episode on this with Nick Licamelli, which is an awesome episode. But this is basically a strategy that can really generate a lot of muscle fatigue. And there's a couple different like rep schemes you can go with, but essentially the idea is like you're doing 3 or 4 sets of an exercise with like basically maybe 15, 30 seconds of rest in between and doing really high reps with a really light load. So like if I would normally do a 300-pound hip thrust, if I'm going to do blood flow restriction hip thrust, I'm going to use like 95 pounds. I'm going to use like maybe 100, maybe a third, like 25, 30% of the weight that I could normally do. And you're basically cutting off some of the blood flow, like maybe 80% of the blood flow to the area with like straps or wraps. They make specific wraps for this. So you can put on your shoulder joint or your hips. And it absolutely blows you up, but it's something that's actually really popular to be used in like physical therapy for rehabilitation reasons, because it's a great way to kind of like just get isolation in without high loads that make you at risk to injury, right? Because if I were to just do a shit ton of volume with like 300 pounds, chances I get injured are a lot higher than if I'm using a load that's like kind of child's play weight. But doing it under that blood flow restriction basically just makes it harder because your muscles can't get the blood flow they need to recover within the set. So then it's just like really taxing. And if you like the burn feeling, BFR is like one of the best things to just get that and just really, really suffer in that. But it can also be a great alternative for like when you don't have access to load, travel, COVID, everything shut down, and you had 10-pound weights at home. Like, what do you do? This was a great add-in for that. And I used it a lot in the few weeks that I was stuck just in my apartment. And yeah, it could be really, really helpful for like just kind of the convenience factor. Like the bands you could take anywhere, you could just do body weight stuff, blood flow restriction, and it can generate a lot of fatigue really fast.
Yeah,
Did you find
I
it?
found it. Yeah. So I misspoke. He called it blood volume
Yes, I
and
remember that.
blood volume and max overload program.
I remember you told me
So
that.
he said blood volume workouts. The goal of blood volume training is to force as much blood into the muscle. This is done by high reps, supersets, and constant tension on the muscle. This type of training will oxygenate the blood in the muscle, which will first hit slow twitch muscle fibers. But as oxygen in the area becomes sparse, the fast twitch muscle fibers will have to be activated. This training will also cause anabolic hormones to flood the area. Increasing time under tension is the primary goal during these workouts. So blood volume workouts, the reps should be performed very slowly. It should take you a full 3 seconds to lift the weight and a full 3 seconds to lower the weight. At this contracted position, you should also squeeze the muscles very hard. This is very important. You should rest no longer than 10 seconds between exercises within a superset, and then rest 1 to 1.5 minutes between the supersets, but no more. If you're unable to perform the prescribed number of reps and you must lower the weight, this type of training should be extremely painful. And if it's not, you should increase the weight or slow down the reps.
Yeah. So basically that's like constant tension, tempo, and like just high volume all together in one.
Yeah, it sucked, but it was so much fun at the same
Yeah.
time.
I feel like I wonder how much of this people just like created to like see how much pain they could cause and then eventually like decided to put evidence behind it with research. Because
Yeah,
like a lot of
someone like you training.
oh my God, because like I mean a lot of this stuff is evidence backed. Like I won't say German volume is. Blood flow restriction training is evidence backed in the physical therapy realm. Like there's also research on drop sets, rest pauses, like time under tension, that sort of thing. But I'm almost like, what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Like people wanting to just punish themselves or like people who wanted more effective training in the research lab. So yeah, it's funny. But so that's another one then, blood volume training. So then we have drop sets and rest pauses, which actually we just had our last coaches meeting on this, but I learned something at that meeting, which was drop sets and rest pauses seem very similar in ways in terms of how they're categorized, but actually have distinct differences. So a drop set is I do a set at my maximal load, maximal reps, go to failure, cut the weight by like 30 something percent and do as many reps as I can again. And sometimes you do that multiple times in a row. And the idea here is you're going past failure because you went to failure with your set and then you added more. And that can generate a lot of fatigue and also teach your body like, hey, you can do something past failure. My tolerance for this might be higher. A rest pause, similarly, is you do that max set, then you take a little rest pause, 15 seconds or so, and then you basically do as many reps as you can, again with the same weight. And then basically you can either have a rep target. So I might say 30 reps, do the first set of 15, and then however many mini sets it takes you to get to 30. Or you can say, I want you to do like 3 sets of to failure, like main set and then rest pause set, rest pause set, rest pause set. So there's 2 different ways you can go about it depending on how much control you want as the coach versus the client. You can kind of progress someone differently that way. But essentially the difference though that I was able to parse out was drop sets are a little bit more centered on fatigue because you're just like pushing past failure no matter the load. But the rest pause, you don't change the load. So it can actually really help with tolerating higher reps of higher loads. So if I really wanted to increase my bench press or how many reps I could do with my top bench press, I would do some kind of a rest pause situation, because then it's like I have to use that weight until I get the reps or do the sets. So I'm just training my body like, hey, you're still going to lift this weight. You're not going down. And that's kind of the interesting purpose that I saw behind it.
Yeah. And then that makes me think of cluster sets where it's
Yeah.
like, it's very, very similar, but it's like breaking a set into a mini set with short rest periods. So for example, if you're doing 8 reps continuously, you do 4 sets, rest for 10 seconds, do another 2 to 3, rest, and then you finish the set. And like my coach has me do this too. And it is like the first time I saw these, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So he has me do this with like lateral raises. And so it'll be a cluster set, 8 to 10, and then you have to do 5 reps for as many as possible with 15 in between. So I feel like it looks silly at the gym because most people are just lifting kind of in that traditional, like do a set and then rest. So like see someone like doing like, lateral raises and then you're like resting and I'm like sitting there counting down and I'm like, no, because it still burns. And then, you're only getting like 3 or 4. And then like the next, by the 5th, little cluster set, you can only do like 1 or
You just
something.
look
So
pathetic, like,
I know, yeah, you're like, oh, 1. Okay, done. But yeah, it's really tough, but it's fun in a weird way.
Yeah, definitely. And then I know this is kind of similar, but timed sets. So like instead of having a number of reps, like this is something, for example, you'd be really familiar with like a plank and hold it for 60 seconds. But no one thinks to do that with a leg press. Do as many as you can for 60 seconds. Like, sounds horrible, but you can do timed sets rather than reps. And to progress it, you could just increase the amount of time that you're doing reps for. And you ultimately just have to keep going. So that could be a great way to build volume, tolerance to volume, time under tension. Sounds miserable. I haven't actually ever had that in a program, but I know you said you did.
Yeah, he has me do this with lat raise machine. So he says for the first set, you do between 15 and 20, and then your next one is 60 seconds of continual tension. And then your next set, you go heavier and you go for 30 seconds. And so, yeah, like the other thing that you can do too is instead of just increasing the time, you could try to see how many additional reps you can get within that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like that's why that one specifically is advanced, because you don't
Mm-hmm.
just give that to a beginner, because then they're going to rush reps and like have their form break down, like kind of throwing weight around. That's not what you want, right? It's controlled reps and just like keeping a steady tempo. But can you squeeze out more? Can you go a little bit faster? Can you have the same quality but get more reps in or whatnot? So yeah.
Yep. Yep. You want
Then
pre-exhaust?
exhaust. Yeah, I've kind of like heard differing opinions on this one in terms of whether or not it's actually helpful or useful. But the idea behind a pre-exhaust would be like, if I want to hit my quads more, I would go do leg extensions first, and then I would go do squats after. And the idea is like your quads are more taxed, so in order to keep the form the way that you want, they're going to have to work even harder under more fatigue to, you know, have the same output. But the kind of differing opinions that I heard was just from reputable sources, like people in research and people who would kind of debate about this stuff for fun. But like, for example, like it could just make you have a higher propensity for injury, like, or it could, your body could go into a compensation of like other muscles turn on to compensate for that now weakened, fatigued muscle. So you might not actually be getting more bang for your buck out of your quads. You might just be more fatigued in an area that breaks your form down and makes you more likely to have an injury. Like there's kind of like differing schools of thought there. And I think a lot of that falls under, can you really control your form? Are you that advanced in order to do so? If a pre-exhaust can be effective, or just exercise selection, right? Like maybe don't do it with a barbell squat, do it with a leg extension and a leg press or something.
Yeah.
But that's the idea.
I've heard that for the basically working the other muscle. So like for the example that you use, well, okay, I'm going to pre-exhaust my quads because maybe I'm quad dominant. So when I'm doing the squat, my hamstrings and my glutes take over.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I mean, it really depends like, okay, well, are we going to try to lift our 1 rep max after pre-exhausting our quads? Like maybe don't do that. Like, especially if like
Yeah.
that's if that's what we're trying to do, but it's like, okay, well then maybe I lower the weight a little bit and I have like a higher rep range, like, and I'm more focused on like that mind muscle connection more so than like how much I'm actually lifting. Cause like you said, I think that could lead to injury or kind of like weird movement patterns.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that then it's like, are we really calling it a pre-exhaust, or is it like an activation movement? Like
Hmm.
there's kind of a difference. Like if you're doing something as an activation movement, like I might do some glute bridges before I go do hip thrusts. It's like, well, that didn't exhaust it, but it's like that's how I woke it up. That's how I got it ready to go. So it could be active in that movement, right? So I mean, it's the extent to which you go for it, because a pre-exhaust would be, you're fatiguing that muscle. And then the question is just, is that effective? And um, it will feel effective for sure, no matter if it is or not. But that one, I think the debate is still up in the air. I'm not super up to date on the research though, so I could be wrong.
Yeah, I've heard varying degrees with that one, so I can't say whether or not one's right or wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. But then we have constant tension, which we kind of already talked about, but essentially the idea is you are under the load for a longer period of time. So, I could do 10 reps really fast, or I could do them really slow. And I'm actually going to get a different effect. Like all other variables the same, I will get a different effect by making that one change. So I think this kind of speaks to like just control over the weight. Like if you are kind of bouncing a chest press, for example, or a bench press, like you're not getting the same effect as if you're like really controlling it down and up and slowing down. Um, and then if you do that intentionally, it's just going to build the tolerance you have to that load, and make that load feel easier when you're just doing regular tempoed reps. So I think that one goes along with tempo really well.
Yeah, or like an example, it would be like, okay, constant tension for like squat. So like when you come out of the hole and you're up at the top, instead of like you'll see a lot of people kind of pause, catch their breath, and then go back down. So it's like, no, we don't do that. There's no rest at the top. Like we're continuously keeping that tension on the muscles. So again, you might have to drop the weight a little bit because the style that you're training in is a little bit different. So yeah, like the other thing that you see too is something like bicep curls or like lat raises when you see people kind of like bouncing their knees or they're kind of like
Yeah.
they're kind of using their momentum for the movement rather than dropping the ego, dropping your weight a little bit, and controlling the weight the entire time, keeping tension rather than like getting to the top and then just dropping. It's like no, we're keeping that constant tension and it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, it definitely makes it harder. I think it's like two actual opposites here. Is constant tension forces you to reduce the weight and forces you to control it more. And then there's forced reps, which basically forces you to, like, either you're using a rep that's too heavy for you and you're literally getting help, like pushing out extra reps, or it's a weight you can do, but once you fail, you get more assistance pushing out more reps. And that might mean on a lateral raise, you're bouncing with your knees to force it.
Hmm.
It might mean some
Yes.
spotter is actually helping you pull something up. This is a technique that you really want to be careful what exercise you do, and make sure it's probably like an isolation movement that you're not going to injure yourself on or drop a weight on your face on. But basically those are kind of two polar opposites. Like forced reps are literally forcing your body past failure to feel like, what does it feel like to do something that I cannot physically do all on my own? Just yeah, and the literature, researchers that I know have talked about this, the opinions are mixed on this, because the amount of muscular damage that creates is almost so hard to recover from that it's not productive at times. So it's kind of a once in a blue moon sort of thing that I feel like is useful, versus every single training session constantly going past failure is probably not actually going to help you progress faster. It could actually just make it harder for you to recover and train as hard as you want.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about something too, like I feel like it's easier to do something like this on like a leg press, or like on a machine where it's like that risk of injury is a little bit lower, but you have someone there helping kind of like push the platform for you.
Yeah.
But this is really popular in Brazil.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons behind it is because it does look so extreme, and you have these trainers like doing these and you see like mostly women, their like legs are shaking, they're crying, like screaming, but it's like that gets a lot of views. It
It
gets a
does.
lot of,
It's very
it gets a
popular.
lot, yeah, it gets a lot of clicks, and the comment sections just pop off. But like if you try to train like that every single session, like I couldn't imagine the recovery like period and what that process looks like afterwards. Like I feel like if I trained like that, like I wouldn't be able to hit legs for like 2 weeks. So
Yeah.
then it's kind of like, well, what is the benefit, right? Like we could
Virality.
possibly, yeah, exactly. And it's like, well, and if you think about it, it's like if you train like that, but you need to take 1 to 2 weeks off from the gym, like did you actually benefit from that training session? If you have
Yeah.
to take that much time off, and like the volume that you miss from the additional training sessions is probably not worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know we're running up on time here. So, I mean, I feel like we covered a lot. So if you guys like this episode, we have more things to talk about. We have more on our list. So definitely just give us some feedback, send us a message on Instagram or an email to let us know that you actually really appreciated this episode. And we can definitely make a part two with what we have on our list that has been untouched, and probably more, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. This was fun, kind of nerding out a little bit and taking a blast into the past or old style of training.
Yeah.
But yeah, guys, we hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. You can find both of us on Instagram. You can find me at Christy Lynn Fit and Marissa at Marissa Roy Fitness. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you back next week.